Well, just to give you an idea of how much of a scam the South Canterbury trial is, all you've got to do is look at a couple of articles that we've got here that were written, one very recently in the last few weeks, and the other one more than 3 years ago, when the 5 directors of South Canterbury Finance were charged shortly after Alan Hubbard's death. Now, what we've got on the screen up here is an article written by Matt Nippert of, back then worked for the National Business Review. He now works for Fairfax, but shortly after Alan Hubbard died, as many of you probably remember, the charges of fraud were shifted across onto the other 5 directors, and none of us had ever heard that any of those people were even being investigated up until Alan Hubbard's death, and then suddenly the government announces that the fraud charges have been shifted sideways onto these other directors. And that was in line with you know, the way the whole case had been conducted. It was just they just kept making the story up as they went along. So Alan Hubbard dies after a car accident. The charges are shifted across to the other directors, and shortly after that, within weeks. And bearing in mind this is New Zealand's biggest ever fraud case in our history, within weeks of them being charged, this guy Matt Nippert comes out with an article saying Hubbard's ghost to haunt South Canterbury trial. Now, you've got to think about this in context, right? This is the justice system. You've got New Zealand's biggest, 5 guys have just been charged in New Zealand's biggest ever fraud trial. That's how the government's pitching it. It's the biggest ever fraud trial in New Zealand history, right? And somehow or another, a National Business Review journalist is able to get hold of their defence strategy and publish it. How does that actually work? How can it be that a journalist can get hold of anybody's defence strategy a year, 2 years, 3 years before they even go to trial, and publish what that defence strategy is going to be? There's something incredibly wrong with that scenario, and that should have rung alarm bells for everybody when he wrote it. Now, one area where he's immediately factually wrong in the article is where he says somewhere in that Alan Hubbard died in a car accident, was killed. Alan Hubbard was killed in a head-on car accident. Well, that's actually wrong. He wasn't killed. He survived for more than 2 hours after the car accident, and he actually died of a heart attack in a helicopter while being transferred to Dunedin Hospital. So you've got these articles that are factually incorrect, and they're being written specifically for the purpose of perception management. They're trying to steer the whole story in a certain direction. So it's no surprise, it shouldn't come as a surprise to any of you now reading articles about the South Canterbury Finance trial now that it's actually happening, and lo and behold, Alan Hubbard is getting the blame for it. Now, that was predicted 3 years ago, shortly after his death, within a very short period of time of those other directors being charged. And only a few weeks ago, one of his colleagues, Emma Bailey from the Timaru Herald, effectively borrows his headline, steals his story. Spectre looms over fraud hearing. Look at the first line. The ghost of Alan Hubbard haunted the South Canterbury Finance trial yesterday. So that was predicted 3 years ago. So Emma Bailey appears to be a rocket scientist. She's either plagiarised Matt Nippert's article, she's either basically stolen his copy, or these guys are just making the story up to a pre-agreed agenda in order to manage your perceptions about it. But one thing you've got to be very clear about: there is no way on earth that a journalist should be able to get hold of anybody's defence strategy and go and publish it before they ever get to court. There's something really wrong with that equation. So I'd ask you to seriously question everything you're being told about the South Canterbury trial, because I can absolutely guarantee you that it is a scam, just as much as the allegations against Alan Hubbard were. The entire South Canterbury Finance collapse and receivership is the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the New Zealand public, and I can absolutely assure you that Alan Hubbard's accusers are guilty of that fraud.